Hi, this is Jason Shulman, and welcome to the fourth conversation about spirituality from the Foundation for Non-Duality. I'm very glad to be here today. I'm glad that it's not raining. It's been raining for weeks. Everything is soft and mushy, but today we have a sparkling blue day with yellow daffodils and sparkling pond outside. So I'm very happy to be here, and I hope that there are a lot of people tuning in, listening. What I would like to do, just to lay out what's going to happen, I'm going to, in a moment, invite my conversation guest who's with me today, who's a very special friend. And I'm going to speak for a few minutes about the topic. The ego is our spiritual friend. And then Kim and I will talk, and then we're going to open it to questions. And I really invite you to ask questions about our topic or about anything. Some things I won't answer because I won't know anything about them, but others I will. So let me introduce my friend Kim Rosen. Kim has been my friend for, I was trying to figure this out, Kim, I think about 40 years. When we were part of the same spiritual community. Life kept me here on the East Coast and brought her to the West Coast, where she lives, and also brought her to a way of using poetry as a sacred text, as a kind of medicine to bring people to their deepest contact with their self. It's really quite extraordinary to hear Kim read a poem, and that might happen in our conversation today, but to follow her voice as she reads a poem is to bring you to the place where everything matters. And it's a deeply spiritual experience. So, Kim, I want to welcome you. I don't know, are you on screen now? I think you're on screen. We don't know. Okay, and that was the voice of Jared Drake, who's helping us here, and Julie Coriel is going to be helping us. And in a few minutes, you'll hear the voice of Gina Turner, who's going to be helping us with the questions. So let me just talk for a few minutes. I wrote some of my thoughts down here. I would say that every conversation about spirituality is really a conversation about the ego, the sense of the separate self. It's like the uninvited guest who shows up for dinner, whether you wanted them there or not, because the sense of a separate self and the sense of this other self that we seem to participate in some way, this vast connectedness, that interface is where all the glory is and where all the problems are. So it's in every conversation. So when I say ego or sense of personal self, that's all I mean, that sense of I and the ownership of being a person that goes along with it, an identity, an individual. From my perspective, there's always been a kind of confusion about the role of the ego in our spiritual life. We hear basically two main storylines. One, that the ego is illusory and that we have to somehow rise above it or below it or move around it, and to see that it is really not all that it's cracked up to be. And that it's troublesome. Either it's illusory or it's simply troublesome and we have to rise above it, as I said before. But from my perspective and my understanding of non-duality, both of these, this particular conundrum, this problem, these two ways of looking at it are problematic. They're not accurate understandings of what we are attempting to do as spiritual beings. From my perspective, the ego needs to be our partner in our spiritual life, the same way our hands and our feet and our beards and our glasses and our hair, if you happen to have hair, are our partners along our spiritual journey. Somehow, when it comes to the ego, we think we can do without that ego, that it is on some level our ignorance or our enemy, even depending upon how deeply you don't like yourself. So the whole point of the spiritual journey, from my perspective, is to be in touch with the totality of our being. This means becoming conscious of all of who we are, our finest parts, our most courageous and beautiful parts, and our smallest parts, the parts that are troublesome and imperfect. We could say that the spiritual journey is about trying to achieve the unobstructed view. And the unobstructed view doesn't mean we're going to get everything out of the way and just have pretty scenery. It means exactly what it says, which is that we will have an unobstructed view of who we are. Those aforementioned wonderful parts and our smallest parts. So again, from my perspective, the ego is neither good nor bad. Instead, it's either healing or unhealed. An unhealed ego and a healing ego. It needs to be involved in our spiritual journey because it's part of being human. I wrote here, you wouldn't say I'll go on my spiritual quest, but I won't include my nose. You have to have your nose. Now, the ego has a problem because it's trying to do two opposite jobs at the same time. So because of this, the ego is always broken to some extent. Job one is it wants to explore, it wants to change, it wants to grow, and it wants to remain the same, to remain safe, and to safeguard its own identity as if it was an unchanging, solid thing. As they say in Kabbalah, this is a problem. Reconciling these two opposite jobs takes hard and continuous spiritual work. But as it begins to heal, we find that the ego is the perfect vehicle for our spiritual work. In fact, it's the only vehicle for our spiritual awakening. When I wrote my notes about this, when I was exploring what I wanted to talk about, I decided to talk about Thich Nhat Hanh. And Thich Nhat Hanh was alive at that point. Now he's passed on. But here's what I said about Thich. I said that the important thing about him was not his egolessness. He wasn't egoless at all. But what he did do was train his ego toward the relational, toward connectivity, toward openness, toward dignity, and toward wholeness. That was what he did. This means, from the point of view of the unobstructed view, to know wholeness means he needed to know both sides of his ego. He needed to know the healing ego, which allowed him to see the part that he was going to play in the world, his awakening part, the part that was not going to resist this awakening anymore. And he needed to know intimately the unhealed part of his ego as well, that connected him to all of the difficulties and evil and imperfection of the world, because he had already found them in himself. That's wholeness. Wholeness is not choosing only to have the pretty view. Wholeness is to have the totality of our being, as Thich Nhat Hanh did and spoke about many times. Only both parts of his ego were enough to connect him to the web of life, which was really what he was after. and to resolve the conflict between these two parts of the ego. Resolving the conflict means helping the ego to grow up, to heal, so that it becomes apparent the importance of both parts of the ego and its struggle are seen as important, and we learn to tolerate that dissonance. It's not so much the dissonance goes away, but that as we learn to tolerate it with openness, it reveals itself to be something quite beautiful. When we see this dilemma clearly and with kindness, actually, we don't even have to have kindness. When we really see this dilemma, kindness and compassion arise spontaneously. For me, that's the origin of kindness. When I really see this dilemma and I see my need for safety and for continuity and my need to explore and grow and let go simultaneously. Once we see this, once we understand this, not only does compassion and tenderheartedness arise in us, but we begin to see that the ego in its healing state is compassion itself. It doesn't contain compassion, it is compassion. So this whole dilemma that I'm trying to give us a quick flyby here, we don't grow out of this dilemma. If only. No. We don't grow out of this dilemma, we grow into this dilemma. And that means we become willing to notice the dilemma and we become willing to face it directly. And we become willing to extend to ourselves the same compassion and self-compassion that we want to give for people. So the greatness of someone like Thich Nhat Hanh for me was that he didn't separate his brokenness from his wholeness, but saw them as part of some greater whole. That was his awakening for me. When we embrace our brokenness, we do that because only brokenness knows wholeness. And wholeness, we embrace that because we can then embrace brokenness with our compassion and with our heart and with our own brokenness as well. So that's why I consider the ego our spiritual friend. It's our companion, and it becomes a deep ally when we treat it the right way, give it the right food and sustenance, compassion and healing. So I think that's all I want to say in terms of my prepared remarks. I get Kim, you're here now, right? You're on screen. And we had a talk the other day. We came together to say hello. So anything you'd like to say, I'd love to hear.
Well, first I'd like to say hello to anyone and everyone who's here. I'm so happy to be with all of you, and I'm happy to be with my old, in so many deep and precious ways, friend Jason, who I've known since I was 22, which was exactly 43 years ago.
43 years.
Yeah.
Oh,
Years ago.
I was only 70 then in 20.
Oh, I think you were 700, always. But it's a joy to be with you. And I just love being with you and hearing the world pour through your particular alchemical vessel and come out in such always new ways, so that I recognize my own. I go, oh, okay, so that's how I can understand this. It's a new language for what I already know about myself, but I know deeper and more intimately. So thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I do have a question.
Yeah.
You said that we need to, well, you didn't say this, but basically we need to take care of, the ego needs to be cared for and fed I think you used the word fed just in your last sentences, and cared for. And that's not something I've thought about doing. I've certainly thought about uh, in what you're calling the ego, which I've not used that word in that way, but that's a different conversation. But I've thought about training it and awareness and uh, searing self-honesty as being some of my precepts, but not caring and feeding
Mm,
or in feeding the ego.
mm.
What do you mean by
Well, for one thing, it means paying attention. And one of the things we need to pay attention to is our suffering. Because I don't think I'm the only one who said this, but our suffering is the mother of the bodhisattva. It's
that?
suffering that brings us to our spiritual path, right? I mean, without our suffering, if we have, grand trines all over our astrological chart and everything just seems to fall into place all the time, and we have a trust fund and so on and so on. I actually met someone like this once. We never get to be on a spiritual path. So our suffering, which at first we avoid, right? When we don't pay attention to it, we're not nurturing the ego. When we don't pay attention to it, we're not feeding the ego. By feeding, I mean nurturing. I mean giving it the metabolic food that it needs. The metabolic food in this case is paying attention to the suffering, seeing that it's a kind of cri de coeur of our ego. It's the cry of the heart of our ego, and to listen. And when we listen, some of it is clear and some of it is mysterious.
Mm-hmm.
And then finding the right methods, the right paths to help us decode what the ego is trying to say. And then, so there's a whole level of egoic work. And then there's another level of work in which the existence of the ego itself is looked at, and we're no longer only doing the psychological interior work, but we're doing a much bigger look at the existence of the ego itself and what that means in terms of the origins of suffering and our consciousness. So all of that kind of work, which obviously we could talk for days about, is how we nurture the ego. It's not simply giving it license. It's not obviously. It's not. It's being kind toward it, seeing that it has these two jobs, and the two jobs, I'll state again, are it wants to explore, change, and in the beginning it wants to be great and conquer and do all sorts of things. It wants fame and glory and eternal life, and the other is remain the same. Because life is dangerous. It's clear that we don't have control over life. So let's remain the same and safeguard our identity. Both of those things have opposite valence, opposite vectors. So anyway, that's what I could say about that off the top of my head.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think I keep thinking of I yeah, that was a little dated response. I was looking for Kim Kardashian, but
Right.
um, but Rumi writes and Coleman Barks translates, "This being human is a guest house. Every morning a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness. Some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all.
Right.
Even if it's a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house clear of its furniture.
Right.
treat each guest accurately.
Metaphors. When you hear a light like that, what
Yes.
what can you say? That encapsulates all of it.
Mhm.
And all of the practices that we do when they're geared toward making manifest the expression in that poem,
Mhm.
those spiritual instructions and that prescription for living
Yeah. Yeah.
is is it.
Mhm.
And the thing is, I have a very nonlinear view of these things. So it's not so much that you do this and do this and do this, and then you get to this place where you no longer have to do this. Or you do this and do this and do this, you climb the rungs, and you get to this point where it no longer exists. Instead, for me, at a certain point, the whole process becomes one of delight. The whole process becomes one that you invite, literally, that you invite in, not because you're getting someplace, but because you're here. You're getting here. You're not getting anyplace else. You're getting here and more here and more here.
Yeah. Yeah. It's that poem by Galway Canal that I shared with you yesterday, where he
Which
says
one was that? Tell me again. Let me hear it again.
prayer, and it's really short. It's 3 lines, and you kind of have to
Oh,
see it
yeah.
on the page to realize how brilliant it is. But I'm just going to do it with my hands when it goes to another line. Whatever happens, whatever what is what I want. Only that, but that.
Yeah, yeah. So, I have the experience of a split between my daytime and nighttime sometimes. In the daytime, I'm, thinking, I'm creating, I'm writing music, I'm teaching, I'm having meetings like this with friends and so on, and I'm filled with light. Nighttime, much harder. Nighttime, things happen that I don't know that I haven't met before, you know? And sometimes I feel at a tremendous loss and wonder why I still find myself in certain circumstances that are dark or difficult and so on. And I find the only answer for me is that I have not included them in some manner. In some manner, I believed some sort of egoic, unhealed egoic propaganda that said I shouldn't have these things as someone who's been on the spiritual path since he's 4 years old. That somehow I should be beyond these things, which means that I'm going to abandon isness. If I think that's true, I'm going to abandon the container that contains all things and think that I want to live in a special container that only contains the good things that I like, only my daytime, not my nighttime.
Mhm.
I feel best, for instance, in this moment, when my daytime remembers my nighttime and I have no territory to defend because I don't have to present myself as somebody who's only in daytime.
Mhm.
I can say I have two hands. One's in daytime, one's in nighttime, and they're both me, and I'm free because of that.
Mhm.
I'm not free because I don't have those things. I'm free because I have both of them.
And and perhaps that's the healing ego gathering the unhealed ego into reality.
Yes, that's exactly it. That's exactly it. So let me see if Gina, are you there, Gina?
Ah, yes, I am.
Do we have do we have people listening, and do they have questions?
Yes, we have people tuning in from Chicago, Chattanooga, Catskill Mountains, New Hampshire. And we have two questions. The first one is for Jason. Can you restate the two jobs the ego is attempting to do that set up the dilemma?
Sure. One is survive at all costs, in which case the best strategy, at least in the beginning, is don't do anything. Stay put. Don't let experiences, positive or negative, change you, because you want to exist from one moment to the next, and you want to project out that particular identity of one moment, same identity the next moment, same identity, unchanging. The ego then sees itself as a solid, independent being, separate from all things. That's one job. One belief, I might add. It's a belief. The other belief is this excitement that the ego has to explore, to change, to reduce its suffering, to find out the origins of its suffering and be free of its suffering. If you read the Buddhist Four Noble Truths, you can read it from that point of view. What suffering is, what it causes, the origin of suffering, and how to get free of it. You can read that as an exploration of that part of the ego's job. Both of those two things causes a dissonance until such time as it's reconciled, as I mentioned in my earlier remarks.
And the next question is from Andrew. I'm curious about the relationship between the ego and the type of aloneness that feels painful.
Well, I'd have to know more about what that actually meant. Um, you know, we are utterly alone on many levels, and we're utterly connected. It's not going to be one or the other. If we're looking only for one or the other, we are in some degree of fantasy. Different types of fantasies, because utterly alone is a fantasy because we're not utterly alone. And only connected is a fantasy as well, because we're often not connected. It's part of the human experience. So specifically in terms of how this plays out in your own body, mind, and spirit, I'd have to know more in some other setting than this.
May I add something?
Sure.
Or just include just a personal experience. And I realize that this may or may not relate to the person who's asking, to Andrew's aloneness. But we spoke yesterday about an experience I had with one of my teachers, Gangaji, when in 1997. So I can't do the math to know how old I was at that point, but it was 1997, and I'd been in the path work for many years at that point. And I think if I hadn't had the experience of, although I wouldn't have put it this way, but you've given me a different articulation of it today, of training my ego, which you said about Thich Nhat Hanh, training my ego to turn towards the letting go of awakening, I never would have been available to what happened. But I want to say that what happened was one night I followed, and it was night, so there it was. I followed Gangaji's guidance into the very heart of my loneliness, which was the theme note of my life up to then. I would not have known myself without that loneliness. I actually thought it gave me all my artistic juju, but I turned right into the center of it. And this is crass to make a long story short, or an inarticulable moment articulate, but in the turning towards at the deepest level and the opening to the loneliness and the surrender to it, it was gone. And what I thought of as myself, was also gone in that moment. I don't think I could have gone into gone had I not had the years. Honestly, maybe somebody else can wake up in a second, without ever having contemplated their inner life. But I have had years and years and years.
Kim, let me interrupt for 1 second. We're getting some static with your thing. Shut your mic for a second, and then turn it on again. Nope, it's still there. Now it's gone.
I don't know what that is.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm done. But there's a poem by Rumi where he says, "One night a man was crying, Allah, Allah. His lips grew sweet with the praise until a cynic came by and said, I've heard you crying out night and day, but have you ever heard anything back?" The man had no answer for that. He quit praising and fell into a fitful sleep. He dreamed he saw Khadir, the guide of souls, in a thick green foliage. "Why did you stop praising?" Khadir asked. "Because I never heard anything back. This longing you express is the return message. The grief you cry out from draws you towards union. Your pure sadness that wants help is the secret cup. Listen to the moan of a dog for his master. In that whine is the connection. There are love dogs no one knows the names of. Give your life to be one of them."
Another gorgeous poem. So, this in our work, we have something called a Briatic awareness, which refers to one of the Kabbalistic universes. And, even to talk about longing, which is unrequited, is different from longing that is the thing itself. Isn't it? Is this clear enough to say it this way? So that poem, that kind of longing, which is, it's like longing with no object, so to speak, even though there is an object in the Sufi path, which is Allah. But that longing in and of itself, filled with itself, complete in itself, is freedom and is liberation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah. I could spout another poem, but I think you want to go to the questions, so I will.
You know what? I brought a poem. You ready for this one? This is Walt Whitman. It's called "Oh Me, Oh Life." I bet you know this one, right?
Oh.
What a trip. Okay, so he has a question and an answer. The poem has a question, unstated question, and then a stated question. Here goes. And I can't read the way you do, but I'll do my best. "Oh me, oh life, of the question of these recurring, of the endless trains of the faithless, of cities filled with the foolish, of myself forever reproaching myself, for who more foolish than I, and who more faithless? Of eyes that vainly crave the light, of the objects mean, of the struggle ever renewed, of the poor result of all, of the plodding and sordid crowds I see around me, of the empty and useless years of the rest, with the rest me intertwined, the question, oh me, so sad, recurring. What good amid these, oh me, oh life? Answer, that you are here, that life exists, and identity, that the powerful play goes on, and you may contribute a verse."
Oh,
The meeting of these guys in heaven, it's just so beautiful. So Gina, are there more questions?
There are.
Cool.
So from the silent architect, what would you recommend when we have an inner judge that's extremely harsh anytime we make a mistake, whether the mistake is large or small? Is this ego related?
Well, of course, I've never had such a problem, so it's very difficult to answer because I've never had a intense judge that I've come in contact with me. I've had a perfect life. Yes, we all have, to one degree or another, this. How did you put it? How did the questioner put it? The silent architect. They put it. What kind of judge? What was the
An inner judge that's extremely harsh.
harsh? Yeah. You know, I've done many things with my harsh judge. For one thing, I chanted. Namu Amida Butsu. Namu Amida Butsu, which is the heart of Pure Land Buddhism, means that I surrender to, I let go to Amida Buddha, the Buddha of infinite light and life. But really what I think helped me was I realized it was my harsh judge was a kind of pride, telling me that I should be something that I wasn't. On a certain level, I had to say to myself, who do you think you are, Jason, that you should be better than you are? Not only that, but I was able by doing that to explore what it was like to be a truly imperfect being, to see if I died. Did I die? What happened? It was such an enormous relief not to hold up any sort of notion of perfection, but to be someone who had no territory to defend. And by the way, let's be careful when I accidentally use idealized words like no territory to defend. Let's say less territory to defend, because nobody has no territory to defend. Maybe there's one every 500 years who had the right genome and the right upbringing and the right food and the right moment. But for the rest of us, to have less territory to defend, that we have to have an image of ourselves as something more than we are, is an enormous burden. So you have to begin to realize, I think, again, without knowing the specifics of your life, this is just a general answer, but it was an answer for me, that it's a form of pride, just to restate it, a form of pride to think I should be someone whom I'm not. It's not kind either. You know, many, many years ago, I was doing a Zen sitting, a sesshin, at the San Francisco Zen Center with Dainin Katagiri Roshi. And I don't know if I told this story on air before, but I'll try to make it brief. I had just come off of a 7-day wilderness hike and I went right into this sesshin. So I was really blown out. And I came there and I was doing my version of Shikantaza, which is just sitting. It's Dogen Zenji Zen. And I decided in my ignorance that meant I would have no thoughts. So I sat there for 7 days with no thoughts. And my meeting with the teacher happened to be, coincidentally, the last day of the sesshin at 4 a.m. That's when we started meditating. And I came into the meeting with Katagiri and I said, my practice is Shikantaza and I have an enormous headache. And he said, oh, He said, come outside with me. And I came out onto the balcony. It was still dark. There were stars out. And he said, Zen is kindness. Don't go back to your cushion. Go outside. And this was like somebody telling me, it was incomprehensible to me at that time that he wanted me to go outside and kindness. So I went outside. I was able to tolerate outside, not meditating and breaking my head for about 5 minutes. It was all I could tolerate. However, I think that that is the core of my understanding of spirituality. Because although I have encountered many esoteric things, all sorts of states of consciousness, experiences, satoris, kenshos, hells and heavens, if they don't add up to kindness, what's the use? I mean, really, what's the use? So when you have a harsh judge, don't judge the harsh judge. Just see that it's more pride and more deviltry, so to speak, to not be kind to yourself at that point. To see yourself, you're being given an opportunity to see yourself as you are. Kim, you might have something else to say there too.
No, I just want to underline the bit of what you shared where you said, when the judge comes, whether it comes from outside, which is rare, or inside, which is frequent for me as well, the skillful means, which I constantly forget, and maybe it's the unhealed ego that works to forget it, is to go, yeah, you're right. You're right. I am broken, messed up, wrong. As I think, is it a Zen or Buddhist saying, to drive all blames into the self, and to find it and to surrender to that experience of being as, Adam and Eve did, of being good and evil. Once you wake up and eat of the tree of knowledge, you realize you are good and evil. And yeah.
Yeah. In Pure Land Buddhism, we are called foolish beings.
Mm.
And it's a nice way to put it, not stupid beings, not less than beings, not dirty beings, foolish beings who try our hardest, who stand up only to fall down. And the trick is getting back up, and being a foolish being is to cede some of your territory to heaven.
Yeah. Yeah.
So.
Well, wait. To cede some of your territory to heaven. Can you unpack that a little?
Well, we think we have territory that we own. We're just returning it to the owner.
I see. Yeah, I keep thinking of a line from Rumi where he says, be helpless, dumbfounded, unable to say yes or no. Then a stretcher will come from grace to gather us up. We are too dull-eyed to see that beauty. If we say we see it, we're lying. If we say no, we don't see it, that no will behead us and shut tight our window onto spirit. And it goes on.
That's it. That's just what I said. That's just great. I feel like I'm having lunch with Rumi today.
I know Rumi's coming in. I was already with my battalion of Rilke poems because you always somehow remind me of Rilke, but here's Rumi via Coleman Barks.
Beautiful. Yeah, he did a lot of work on those. I have some Turkish translations, which are very different.
Yeah, that's a whole other conversation, but I'm grateful to him.
Absolutely. He's
as well.
added something fantastic. He's opened so many doors. Beautiful. Gina, any more questions?
Yes. This is a long one, so I'm going to go a little slower. It's from Michael. I really feel that tender place of allowing the at times surprising display of difficulty and their emotions, and how it feels so impulsive to want to get over. The other side of me begins to relax with the alternative of relaxing with the all that is present. Can you say something about how to more effectively come back to relaxing sooner? Is it simply to continue trying? Or is there something else that could be said?
Wow. Again, I can give you my own experience here. You know, there's a phrase that comes up in spirituality, especially in the Upanishads and in certain versions of Advaita and especially in American non-duality, which is that people are searching for a state that doesn't come and go. And from my perspective, that's misinterpreted. It's misinterpreted to mean that one will achieve a certain plateau and remain at that plateau. It no longer comes and goes. You don't lose it. I don't take that phrase that way. For me, that's not what awakening is. What awakening is, again, I have to use other words like spaciousness, like surrender, like words like that, that not coming and going means that it is big enough, it is unresistant enough, so that up and down are both valid expressions of the infinite possibilities of God. If you want to use God, or of Bodhisattva, of mind, body, spirit, if you want to use those words. So when I've come across those moments, when I pursue relaxation, I have a hard time finding it. Sometimes it's good just to go get a massage. I'm serious. I'm not just making a joke. Or to, to have a good conversation with a friend, or a glass of wine, or tea, or coffee, whatever your thing is. That's certainly valid as well. On another level, though, if I have stopped the coming and going, then I'm no longer in the thing that no longer comes and goes. It sounds paradoxical, but it's not. If I've stopped the coming and going, if I've stopped the coming and going, I'm no longer allowing the natural expansion, stasis, and contraction that our human lives are filled with to occur. My aim would be to be non-resistant to that, non-resistant to running and returning, as they say in Kabbalah. Non-resistant to running and returning. I think that's the bigger paradigm than a smaller idea of remaining in one state.
And let me just say, I'm looking at the question here, which is so beautifully written. And it seems so clear that the answer to the question, which is the same as as my understanding of what Jason just said, is in the question. Do you know that you say how it feels so impulsive to want to get over? The other side of me begins to relax with the alternative of relaxing with all that is present. Can you say something about how to how to more effectively come back to relaxing sooner? Well, that sounds like trying to get over to me, but also, just to bring in Rumi to corroborate what you're saying. And in a way, you could call it maybe strengthening the ego or training the ego to, and these are Rumi's words, learn the alchemy true human beings know. The moment you accept what troubles you've been given, the door will open.
Yeah, there it is again.
Yeah.
There it is again. Wow.
Yeah. Welcome difficulties as a familiar comrade. Joke. Now that's a stretch for me, but anyway, joke with torment brought by the friend. Sorrows are the rags of old clothes and jackets that serve to cover for a while and then are taken off. That undressing and the beautiful naked body underneath is the sweetness that comes after grief. The hurt you embrace becomes joy. Call it your arms where it can change.
Say the last line. Call it your arms.
Call it to your arms where
Where
it
can
can change.
Oh. Oh. So even when we hear something we don't like, when it's the truth, when it's that level of truth, we feel ecstasy. Do we not? Bring the enemy to yourself, and behold, it becomes an ally. It becomes your child, you know? So it's just beautiful. Thank you so much for knowing these poems, Kim.
Well, thank the poems for helping me nourish and train my ego to turn towards
Yes. Yes. Beautiful. So we have a few minutes left for a few more questions, if there are. Gina?
Yes, we have one from Roy. How do we remain unattached as we speak about all this? It seems to me that speaking is, by definition, discriminatory. Yet, we want to reach ourselves and each other. Let go as we let go.
Is that the end of the question?
Yeah.
So I don't know what Kim will think about this, but my first question would be, why unattached? The problem is not attachment. We're attached to breathing. We're attached to eating. We're attached to going to the bathroom. We're attached to kissing. We're attached to speaking. We're attached to thinking. Our entire human life is about attachment. The idea is not to be attached to attachment. To not worry about attachment in that particular way. When attachment is excessive in one thing or another, we have to work with that. But to idealize a mythical and not only mythical, there was another word that occurred to me. To idealize a state of equanimous non-attachment is an image of what spirituality is. And let's think of some other robust images of what spirituality is. Maybe it's not only a quietude of some sort. Maybe it's not only an image of what unattachment is. Being unattached to the flow of life and letting ourselves be with attention and with grace, with kindness and compassion, and also discriminatory awareness is part of what awakening is from my perspective. Listen, when I was a young spiritual student, I felt I had to bow a certain way. I had to have a little tiny smile on my lips. When something bad happened, it was disgusting. It was terrible. It was a burden. It was such a burden to think I had to be some way other than my true fundamental self.
And let me just say that for myself personally, what I'm hearing, which could be my projection in this question, has been one of my life agonies is the imperfection of putting this experience into words so that you can get me and get it, and we can be there together in the same exact communion and know what each other means. You know, every time I write or speak, I'm trying to remember the lines from T.S. Eliot. I can't. You know, it's a car crash of failure. And yet there is that longing, which Jason's calling the healing ego, that Rilke says, I want to set free my innermost feeling so that what no one has ever been able to express will spring through me unstoppable, you know, but it's destined to failure. And yet we need to keeping willing to have all those feelings that come with that failure of putting things into words.
But failure is a joy. Failure can be an amazing joy.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's very interesting as a songwriter, which is one of the things I do. I can't tell you, for every song that comes out, there are 2 or 3 failures. And I enter into those failures. I don't do this in my entire life, but in songwriting I do. I enter into the songwriting, and the failure it teaches me so much. It's so tactile and so nourishing.
It's
So
like that poem I recited. I'm only going to recite the last few lines. Whoever was beaten by that angel, who often simply declined the fight, went away great and strengthened and proud from that harsh hand that kneaded him as if to change his shape. Winning does not tempt that one. This is how he grows, being defeated decisively by constantly greater beings.
defeated constantly by greater beings.
Being defeated decisively by constantly greater beings. It's
Yes.
Rainer Maria Rilke, translated by Robert Bly, I think.
Yeah. Oh my Lord, this is just wonderful. Well, Gina, we're just about at the end of our time. Is there a final question, or maybe we should?
No, we can wrap it up, I think.
Okay. So, first of all, Kim, what an utter honor and delight it is to be with you.
Yes, ditto.
It really is wonderful. I got to tell you, it's cured me of 18 diseases just today.
Me too. It's a joy to dolphin dance with you in realms of truth and the always perpetual inadequate attempt to articulate truth with the hope that it comes through anyway.
It's perfect for me. So, all you guys out there, I hope there are many guys out there, and people will be able to listen to these talks on the foundation website, which is www.nonduality.us.com. The foundation is a not-for-profit. I hope that people will donate a little bit to help us continue all of these programs that we're trying to get going, and to reduce, even by some minute amount, all the suffering that we have by being alive, and increase all the joy we have by being alive as well. So thank you, Kim. Gina, thank you. Jared and Julie, who are behind the scenes, thank you guys. And see you soon.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.